Welcome to Say Brothers of Booze. Welcome to the Cult Bar, folks.
No, that's in a couple days, Doug.
Sorry. Welcome, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Cult Bar. This week, as we're going to talk about Waco. But before we start, Renee, tell us what you are drinking, please.
I am drinking the Royal Fuck Up. If you watched the documentary, you probably know why. If you didn't, you will soon find out. This is whiskey, peach schnapps, pineapple juice, and cranberry juice. I think I found another one called the Royal Fuck Up that had different stuff in it that didn't sound good. So if you go look it up, like this one is whiskey and peach schnapps. I'm going to taste it. I haven't tasted it yet. So it's pretty good. Pretty good. It kind of reminds me of a not so nicely named drink I used to drink when I was in the Marines called a redheaded slut.
Oh.
Not quite as like thick and sweet as that shooter, but it's pretty nice.
Well, as long as you enjoy it, that's good. You know, like I think I remember. I don't think I've ever had a redheaded slut, but that is very much like a college, young person's kind of drink, I think. So
yeah.
So what I'm going to go with here is the Prophet in Plain Clothes. Thanks to Renee for finding this, because I was having a hell of a time finding an appropriate cocktail for this show. But what I think also is we could also make the comment that this particular cocktail could apply to a lot of the cults we talk about.
It's true.
Yeah. So, apropos of all of them, maybe. This one, just so you know, this one is a lot of things so it's two different kinds of Amaro. One of them is a Fernet Branca, which I'd never heard of. And then just I had a regular Amaro, and then they call for Lafroig 10-year Scotch. I picked another Islay. I picked Talisker Storm because it's peaty. And then there's sweet vermouth. And then on top, I don't know if you can see, I got the old fancy Luxardo cherries, the Rolls Royce of cherries. Fancy pants.
Fancy.
So this, I did have a sip of it early because I made one for Jill.
Okay, good.
But it is so earthy and peaty, like it tastes like the ground after a rainstorm, but in a good way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, see, and that's why I recommended it to you, because as you know, I'm not a big fan of Scotch, and it just sounded real, like even just how you described it right now, real Scotch flavored, real Scotch experience you're having, and I don't want to drink a tree or the ground after a rainstorm.
yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's like I said, it's very earthy. People think earthy means bad. It just like has a really, good earthy taste. Sorry, I can't give you any more descriptions. Apparently, my tongue's failing me on that one. Just like
But you're right. Like we were talking about this earlier today during show prep. This was the hardest one to find appropriate cocktail for. Everything I found had something terrible in it, like banana liqueur.
Mm-hmm. Or the name was terrible.
Yeah, or it was just so inappropriate and in such bad taste there was no way that I would say it on the air. On the
show, whatever. Air, we'll do it live. Whatever.
So we have a really long content warning. I worked very hard to get it to not take up half the show.
Yes.
We've got, as always, spiritual abuse. Any cult, that's going to be a thing. We've got gun violence. We've got abusive polygamy. We've got child sexual assault. We've got child death. We have state violence. We have parent-child separation. Fire. I think that's it. And just fair warning, my allergies might have me like popping off camera here and there. And you'll see my nose get more and more red as the show goes on. Not really a content warning so much as be prepared.
Well, as long as it's not like the booze that is making your nose red. Well, if it does.
No. It's the flowers. Yeah. Springtime in the desert.
Yeah. So, but before we start delving into Waco and all that is, because, this is the biggest one we've tackled so far. But we also want to touch a little bit on our news. So let's talk about that.
Welcome to the news. If you follow cult news at all, you may have heard about Good News International Church in Kenya. Just recently, I think 15 people were rescued from what they suspect to be a starvation cult. I don't really know the details of like the belief system. Unfortunately, it's only getting worse. The authorities in Kenya have uncovered 58 emaciated bodies, and they feel that they are going to discover a lot more. Like this is the beginning. This is not the end. And I'll probably, I'll post this up in the Instagram and stuff. And if more news comes, we'll try and get it on the socials because this is going to be a pretty big one.
Mm-hmm.
And really what I find a little bit interesting about this is it seems like there are a few countries in Africa right now that are kind of having like a cult infestation, sort of like California in the 70s. It's happening there now for reasons that I'm sure we won't understand for a very long time. Well, that's it. I mean, it's depressing, but that's the news on this one.
Oh. Sorry, I was eating one of those delicious Luxardo cherries. Num, num, num. Which was probably not appropriate during the middle of talking about a starvation cult. But, so we have a lot to get to, but I wanted you to kick us off here and start a bit with something that was kind of a forerunner to this. So do you want to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about Ruby Ridge, correct?
Yeah. So what people may or may not realize, it kind of just depends on how plugged in you are to white nationalist stuff. And, like everybody's on top of that. Anyway, Ruby Ridge happened, the siege at Ruby Ridge happened about 9 months before the siege at Waco. And it's important for a few reasons. One, it was sort of the start of a very big public white nationalist, white supremacist, like PR run against the government. And then also it was a huge embarrassment for the feds for several reasons. And I'm going to try and run through this really quick because it's just needed context. But there's a lot of important details. So, all right. There is a family called the Weavers, Randy and Vicki Weaver, and I think 2 or 3 children, and Vicki's pregnant. They move to an off-grid homestead in northern Iowa. Idaho, sorry, gosh.
Not Iowa. Iowa would be a weird place for it.
I think they started in Iowa and went to Idaho. I got it backwards. Sorry. Anyway, he's a former Green Beret. He's very religious, and they kind of have this idea they want to live like an Old Testament lifestyle. They have their own little personal farm. They hunt for their food, and they've got a handful of guns because they live in the middle of nowhere and they hunt for their food. Their nearest neighbor happens to be the Aryan Nations, also in the middle of nowhere. And I'm just going to be upfront about this. These are not like people you'd want to hang out with, but they didn't deserve all the stuff that you're about to hear. They kind of start hanging out with the Aryan Nations because they're inviting them to potlucks and stuff. And
potluck at the Aryan Nation.
I know. But anyway, they're hanging out with them as like the only socialization they have. They're not involved in any of the criminal activity. They're not, running guns, anything like that. I'm of the opinion that if you hang out with Nazis, you're just as bad as a Nazi. But hanging out with Nazis and committing crimes with Nazis are 2 different things, and that's going to be important later. Despite the fact they are able to feed themselves and live off grid fairly successfully, they do need money for some stuff. And Randy, while he's hanging out with the Aryan Nations, is talking to somebody, and he admits that he's having a hard time making money. And this person suggests to him that he sells sawed-off shotguns. It turns out that this guy was an ATF agent. So Randy sells this ATF agent 2 sawed-off shotguns. He's never done it before. He never does it again. They're like, gotcha. Don't worry, you don't have to go to jail. You're going to be an informant for us. And he says no, probably for a lot of reasons, but one of them is he has no information to give them. He is not involved in anything illegal. He just goes and hangs out sometime. whatever. He's charged, and they have to put their property up as bail. So he is set to lose absolutely everything if he's found guilty. He makes a really dumb decision to not show up to court. 2 years pass. And I feel like this is important. When it happened, apparently it wasn't a big deal. But 2 years later, it becomes a big deal. And they decide to apprehend him on these weapons charges that he skipped bail for. They pull in the US Marshals. The US Marshals are under the false impression that he is a weapons dealer and has a ton of weapons, and that possibly, probably, in their opinion, like the whole Aryan Nations is going to show up and like back them up. So they're doing a lot of recon. There's two stories here. The US Marshal story is they're doing recon, they're in the bushes, they get seen by Randy and their house guest, and one of the guys is shot. And then there is a shootout. The teenage son dies, and this is how it starts. Now, the Weaver story sounds a little bit more likely, and they, spoiler alert, won in court so they could prove it. They were out, they heard rustling in the bushes, the dog went toward the rustling, and they thought they were going to shoot like a buck. And then something shot their dog. The kid freaked out, shot at the direction of the gunfire, shooting a US Marshal. Long story short, they get the kid's body back. There's a lot of freaking out going on, as you might imagine. The house guest has been injured. And the US Marshals realize that Randy's not going to come surrender. At this point, he hasn't been asked to, by the way. And this is an important detail.
Important detail.
So they bring in the super SWAT team from the FBI, who will make an appearance later in the Waco episode.
Yes,
and they are told that these people are armed to the teeth, extremely dangerous, shoot anyone you see with a weapon on sight. Randy and his friend are preparing the son's body for burial, and they're armed. I'm sorry, this is where the friend gets shot. I screwed that up. But anyway, his friend gets shot. His wife opens the door holding a baby to get them to come in the house. She is not armed. Somebody from Super SWAT shoots her in the head while she is holding their infant and is unarmed. Now they are really freaked the fuck out. They get in the house, they pull her body in the house, and they just lock up. Still, no one is talking to them. No one is negotiating anything. And word that the teenager has been shot has made it to the town, and people are at the roadblock near riot already because they've heard that a teenage boy has been killed for reasons that they don't understand, right? The FBI didn't know that Vicky was dead. I've got a million questions about how they didn't know that, but they didn't. And so they are trying to negotiate with her for the release of the children. And they keep speaking her name and speaking directly to her, which the Weavers read as being mocked, which only sets them further in, fuck these people. Like every time we go outside, one of us dies. And now they shot my wife in the head and are mocking my grief. So they stay. There's an Aryan Nations guy who decides to be a go-between. And basically all he's doing is, I mean, these guys are homeland terrorists. They want to foment distrust of the government. They want something bad to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they are feeding information to Randy and his buddy, making it seem like the FBI is going to shoot him on sight. And then they go to the FBI and they tell the FBI, they're not coming out alive. You're going to have to kill them to get them out. And everybody believes the neo-Nazi, which, hey, pro tip, don't believe the neo-Nazi. Yeah. Long story short,
not trustworthy individuals.
Yeah, so this siege lasts 12 days. They finally decide to bring in a third-party negotiator, which is like a politician that Randy knows of. He goes in, Randy immediately lets him in the house. Like, opens the door, oh, hey, come in. Look, this is bad, but you got to come out, whatever. So initially, they let the guy out who needs medical attention, and third-party negotiator goes back to the FBI, and he says, wow, you guys really fucked up. And he tells them that Vicky is dead and all of this. where the Vicky's dead gets down to that barricade, and now it is just absolutely insane. There's Aryan nations, white nationalists, there's townspeople, they're nutting up. This is hitting the news. It's extremely embarrassing for the ATF, the US Marshals, and the FBI. Third party negotiator goes back. They pack up their stuff, they leave. They voluntarily leave. If you're going to voluntarily leave after they have killed your kid, killed your wife, and injured your best friend, you probably were going to voluntarily leave if anybody had actually told you what the hell was going on. That's my speculation. 2 years later, when all is said and done, Randy Weaver has been found innocent of all charges except violating his bail, and sues the US government for wrongful death of his wife and child, and wins $3.1 million in 1995. It was that bad. So this kind of sets our stage for the feds really needing a win, really wanting a win.
Yeah.
And it also sets the stage for a lot of people maybe on the fringes to kind of side more closely with the far right, because they're seeing this government overreach. They're seeing the unjust killing of an unarmed woman holding a baby and a teenage boy. And this has hit the news, and it's all bad news. 9 months after this, the ATF decides to raid Waco. And that's kind of where we're going to start. I thought it might be cool, Doug, since this is one I think nobody over a certain age escaped Waco coverage when it was happening. What are your memories of this?
I didn't honestly remember a bunch of it because I was kind of in this rural Pennsylvania thing. I was 11 years old when this happened. I was 21. So I apologize. I was also at that point in time in the middle of a pretty heavy gambling addiction. So I really wasn't paying attention to the news all that much, although I was aware of it. I got a lot of the what happened after that.
Right.
So I just remember thinking, I heard about the Branch Davidians and this David, is it Koresh or Koresh? Because I've heard it, and then there's there's like 3 different pronunciations in the documentary.
Yeah, I don't know.
And that wasn't his birth name; that was a name he adopted, I believe.
Yeah, his birth name's like Vernon something.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So anyway, I was not in the throes of it because I was in the middle of some of my own demons at the time. So yeah, it wasn't something that I was really heavily involved. But later on, when I started looking into it and reading about it, and I was just like, this was really fucked up. And this documentary sort of bore that out for us, right?
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting is you probably benefited from learning about it after the fact, because now I was younger than you, and I remember a lot of late night jokes about the wacky people at the wackos at Waco, and the PR machine was in full force of like, these people are fucking crazy and they deserve whatever they get, kind of. And then I remember seeing the smoke, the media covering the fire, which we'll get to in the documentary, which is really fucking depressing. But yeah, I don't have like a lot of memory of understanding really anything about what was going on. More just, these people are crazy and the FBI is going to take care of it.
And we were also in the middle of this is a time when everybody was about being tough on crime. Like,
yes, yeah.
Even Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat, was signing bills for tough crime bills and all this stuff. So we were very much in the throes of, like, you think people talk about Back the Blue now. Now there was no Back the Blue, just everybody did, except for people who were underprivileged and underserved, like the Black community and stuff like that. But I mean, like, white people were all in on backing the feds and the cops and all that stuff. So the propaganda machine,
with the exception of the people who were like clued into the Ruby Ridge thing, which tended to be like some of the worst white people out there.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I like, you've found out about like the details of it later and was disgusted, and especially disgusted by how it was presented in the media, because they really just made it seem like it was never going to go any other way because David Koresh was so evil.
Mhm.
That's really not the whole story at all.
He was evil in some respects for sure. Like
Oh yeah,
he was not someone who was without guilt. But the way they went about this was not okay. So
I would say that the feds are the villains in this story, and so is David Koresh.
yeah, there's no hero in this story
Yeah,
whatsoever. So
it's a rough
that's a good
one.
way to phrase it. Yeah.
So before we get into the because the documentary doesn't really talk much about who the Branch Davidians are.
No, they don't. They just kind of jump right into it. So
So the Branch Davidians were started in the 1930s, well before David Koresh was even born,
mhm.
as a spinoff of the Seventh Day Adventists. And oh, I cannot pronounce the guy's name, but the founder passed his leadership onto a married couple named the Rodens. And eventually the husband died, and this woman was in her 70s running things at Mount Carmel by herself. In comes David Koresh. He's, I think, 25 at the time.
Yeah, he's early to mid 20s, no older than that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's important because they also don't give you a timeline in this documentary, and I think that sheds a lot of light, but we'll get on that anyway. So he's like 24, 25, and he wants to take over. Somehow he ends up sleeping with the old lady. I don't like to think about it. But he
Well,
tells everybody that he got her pregnant. And that's proof that he is literally God because she's 75 years old and well past her, childbearing years. And long story short, she has a miscarriage because she's in on this too. She's saying she's pregnant. And he says that proves that her faith is not as strong as his because he believed it would happen and she didn't. And that's why she had a miscarriage. Long story short, he gets in a gunfight with her adult son. People who think he's crazy leave. People who fell for it for whatever reason stay. 10 years pass about. And in that 10 years, he exerts pretty much complete control over the people of Mount Carmel. Well, we have the forced polygamy. You're not allowed to sleep with your own spouse.
yeah,
David,
that took time, but yeah, he eventually would force couples apart. Yeah, and just the idea that he was the only one entitled to sleep with anybody. Yeah.
yeah, and everybody,
Mhm.
and children as young as 10 years old.
Yes. This is where
Which
we get into there is no heroes in the story, and this is where he was an incredibly bad human.
no, he's terrible. And they talk about like the two survivors. Well, there's three survivors in the documentary, and two of them are still believers. And I guess we could get into a conversation about why I think that is later, but that his justification for it was that in their belief system, you are an adult, you're accountable, you can consent at age 14. And so he was telling them that he was sleeping with girls 14 and up, but he was actually doing it even younger than what he was telling them, which is just a wild, like, if you can convince somebody that you're allowed to sleep with their 14-year-old daughter, I don't really know, like, why.
Yeah, why is the line of demarcation there?
Yeah, it's very, I don't know, like, it's probably not worth examining too much because, like, we're not going to understand it, and I'm fine with not understanding
No,
it.
and sound minds usually don't.
Right. So he's got that level. Let's just like this is to illustrate he's got that level of control over people. He says, "You're not married to your wife anymore, and all the women are married to me, and I'm going to have sex with your like young children." And people were like, "Okay." That is how much control he had over these people in this 10-year period between taking over and when the siege happens. And he also told them that they would die, their judgment would come, and they would die in a standoff with federal law enforcement. In the meantime, to make money, they actually were involved in arms sales, illegal weapons, illegal ammunition, a lot of it. like unbelievable amounts of firearms and ammunition were at Mount Carmel. Now we get to the documentary where the ATF thinks they're going to pop in, take the 40 or 50 guns they have, and pop right out. And I guess I'll turn that over to you for our documentary recap.
Yeah, it is. So the doc just it concentrates on the raid and the siege. So they jump us in, and basically they're jumping in right when the FBI is ready to raid them. They do a very little background on things, except they did do a little bit. I don't know what, maybe maybe 15 minutes talking about the background of that. It talks about the gunfight between him and the Roddens, which is like that's just bonkers that they had like a gunfight inside the compound.
Yeah.
That is just crazy on its own.
If there is a gunfight at your church, first of all, invite me, but
Yeah.
then leave. Like,
It reminds me, I wondered if it was something like, have you ever seen the movie The Kingsman? Where
no.
Colin Firth has like this fight in the middle of a church, and it's the best fight church scene I've ever seen in my freaking life. It's unbelievable. But it reminds me of like, I wonder if that's how it was, like there was chaos, kind of thing. So yeah, so they do a lot of perspectives from the government officials who were there. So got to kind of take them with a grain of salt in that. And they have the 3 Branch Davidian survivors and some of the children that were part of it too, that are now adults. So those are the perspectives. And
a couple of one parent of.
oh yeah, one parent as well, who was a parent of one of the survivors that got out, and there were not many people who got out after that. So I think it was like what 8 or 9 survived after the fire. So yeah, it goes through the FBI raid, which is a combination of FBI and the ATF. The media is somehow magically clued in to be there when the raid happens, which we're going to have a discussion about. That was like the big question, like Renee, hey, that's none of my business, like the Kermit meme.
Yeah.
And it goes horribly. Like multiple ATF agents are dead, bunches of Branch Davidians are dead. It's bad. And David Koresh himself is shot during that raid. And yeah, so the raid itself was just such a mess. Like there was one guy, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he was one of the first guys in, and he got shot. And he said before they went to the raid, there was a moment where one of the reporters that was supposed to be there to cover this raid got lost because it's in the middle of nowhere in Texas. This compound's on what 70 acres, I think they said. It's like
so, yeah.
And
like
it's like in
nearest abandoned house was a mile away.
Yeah, and it is just this house that's in the middle, wide open field around it. There's no like cover, there's no mountains. So, but it's like just kind of the person asked the mailman. Well, the mailman happened to be a member of the Branch Davidians and hears this and drives straight to the Branch Davidian compound, says, the feds are coming. And this kind of bears out Koresh's whole thing. The feds are going to come. We're going to die. This is the moment. So they're gearing up. And
well, he just so happens to be in the middle of giving a Bible study to an undercover ATF agent.
Yes, which we got to talk about him. But but the thing that I wanted to think before we start talking about the raid itself is the one guy who was in the raid who got shot and was injured in his hip, like pretty bad. And when they said they were going to do the raid anyhow, when they found out that they had been tipped off, because the undercover guy told them, hey, they know you're coming. And they were like, fuck it, we're going. And they're trying to do the whole shock and awe approach. And the guy's like, we shouldn't do this. And they're like, we're going. And that guy later in the documentary said, we should have never done that raid. And it's one of the few federal agents that said that was a mistake. There's a few that did, but he was one of them. So
I mean, there's 2 actually, only 2, and I remember that being very enraging. But yes, because the whole thing was that this is all about the element of surprise, and then they're like, hey, we lost the element of surprise. They're like, well, we're gonna do it anyway. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought that was necessary. Oh yeah, but we're all out here already.
Well, also they said they thought they only had like 40 or 50 weapons.
Yeah. So my first question is, what the fuck was this undercover agent doing? Because he certainly was not doing his job. Like,
No, and he didn't report the right amount of like maybe he wasn't deep enough in that they entrusted him to see things. Maybe that's possible. But
yeah,
the also thing is when he told them don't come and they said the raid's coming, he manages to leave. Like, where was the suspicion about hey,
yeah,
where's
he goes
Joe? Like, I
and
don't know.
runs to the operations place. I mean, I feel like at that moment they must have been like, "Oh, that guy was an informant."
Or maybe they
But
were just so busy trying to get ready that they just didn't really keep track of him, and he just thought, "This is my moment to escape." But even so, like he just kind of seemingly easily just kind of meandered away, and
yeah,
yeah,
but he didn't know how many guns were there, and he didn't. I'm assuming he did not give a good understanding to the leadership about what was really going on there. Because that was my takeaway through so much of the documentary is they had no idea what they were walking into. Not just how many guns and how much ammo there was, but how these people were going to react, how unlikely it was to that they were going to like exit of their own accord or give Koresh up. Like it just seemed like they didn't know anything that they needed to know to be successful.
yeah, and even they, of course, one of the things I thought was they're talking about it, and of course the cops say they didn't shoot first, and the Branch Davidians say they shot the cop shot first.
I don't believe
I believe the cop shot first. That's gonna be my I
one
if
hundred.
you're going in on a raid with all these people and you think you're just gonna run roughshod over them, you're shooting first and
So
asking questions later.
here's why I believe the Branch Davidians over the feds. The feds say that David Koresh was walking out the front door to talk to them. And then they received gunfire. And I'm like, okay, so you want me to believe that this all went so badly because these people would do whatever Koresh told them to do and would never act of their own accord no matter what. But also that they were willing to start a gunfight with him standing in the middle of it? Seems weird.
Seems off. So one of the things that I thought was just a funny line was the guy that got shot in the hip and was bleeding out, and I think was it him who said, I should have gotten more life insurance."
Yeah.
No, it wasn't him. It was some other guy who wasn't actually who didn't get shot. He was
He was
just saying
like
like,
talking over the radio, right?
yeah, and he's like,
Yeah.
I should have gotten more life insurance. And I'm like, all right, that's a little weird thought to have in the middle of a firefight, but you do you.
I mean, he's
So
thinking about his family, you know? I respect that.
yeah.
Um, so okay. I guess I want to get into this. Why I fall so firmly not on the side of the feds here. And why I think that their like PR position is 110% bullshit. They knew that there were lots of kids in that building. And at no point through the entire document, no decision that they made seemed to take the welfare and safety of those children into account at all. If you are the kind of person, and I think that this was just like a general truth at the time, if you're the kind of person who says, you're an adult, you're in a cult, you're just as bad as a cult leader, I disagree with you, but fine.
Hmm.
There were like 40 children in that building at the start of this. And they did not seem to give a flying fuck. And they said, oh, well, we're worried there's going to be a mass suicide situation. But then everything they did after that seemed designed to galvanize these people further and to make it more hopeless
Hmm.
if they were to leave. It's just really wild. And I'm just going to say something. This is a very hot take, but I said this to my husband. I think that Bob Ricks, the guy who was in charge there, is personally responsible. Now, granted, he shares this responsibility with Koresh. He is personally responsible for the children who died there. And I think because there is a direct line from Waco to Oklahoma City, where he was
Yeah, that's the thread.
after the fact, he is directly responsible for the death of the children in Oklahoma City as well. And I know that's a super hot take, and people are probably going to be mad about it, but you can't be in charge of two situations where a shitload of kids die and not have people ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with you. Ricks was just he just didn't seem to give much of a shit about the people in there, and I think it speaks a bit, like I said, to the mindset then was just like, hey, if you're a bad person, you're a bad person. If you die, that's what you deserve. Like there was a lot of that going on back then in the 90s, if you recall. I know you were a little younger than me, haha, but it was very prevalent. Like you just did not run afoul of the law, you risk losing your life. And people thought, well, if the cop shot you, well, then you deserved it. You did something to make that cop fucking shoot you. Like
Yeah.
there was none of this whole thing now where people are like, well, why did you do that? Like people were actually questioning.
Well, and
Now.
going back, I forgot to mention this, but you brought it up. Going back, part of the reason that I think that Randy Weaver's account of what happened at Ruby Ridge has to be true is because he won in court. And I can't imagine a single judge in the 90s who wasn't going to take the stance you were taking unless there was an overwhelming amount of evidence.
Yeah, that had to be just, like you said, overwhelming evidence in favor of them. So yeah, I agree. It's just the Rick's guy seemed a little bit like, shoot them all and let God sort them out kind of guy. That's what he felt like to me.
I think yes, but also he had no control over the situation at all.
No, there was so much miscommunication between the agencies and the feds it was astounding to like.
It sounded like he just agreed with whatever anybody said to him. The
Yeah,
negotiator is there. He's working really hard. He's getting Koresh to cooperate to an
and
extent.
release people.
Yeah, people are coming out. Children are coming out. And then the HRT, who've been renamed after Ruby Ridge and are no longer called the Super SWAT. They're the hostage recovery team.
Hostage, was it recovery or
Rescue.
rescue? Was it rescue? Which is an ironic name. But anyway.
Yeah, because they weren't doing that.
Yeah, there was no rescue going on there. So yeah.
I'm just so worried that I'm gonna blow a gasket in this episode, Doug. I don't know. I don't know.
You watched the first episode and you messaged me. You're like, I can't watch another episode. Right? I have to take a break. Like you were just really kind of losing your mind.
And I already knew most of this. And I think like, we forgot to share the link, but the Ruby Ridge information I have came from our favorite podcast, Cult Podcast, and it was actually episode 1 of their Waco series. And I listened to their whole Waco series years ago, and they did not come down on the side of law enforcement at all, right? So I knew, but just seeing the federal agents talk, they bear no, like they don't regret a fucking thing.
The only ones I would say that actually had some remorse were the negotiators. Those some of them, there was 2 of them, I think, that were actually pretty remorseful about how things went. And they honestly, because HRT was involved, and HRT was its own little group doing its own little thing, and they were not in communication with the negotiators. So, that's it. You always kind of want to think that the government's involved. There's multiple agencies that they if they're in a situation where they're both trying to work toward the same ends, and you would think that they would communicate those. We're doing this. Is this okay? That it seemed like none of that was going on. None.
Too, though, Doug, because the negotiators and HRT were both under the FBI. They were both directly reporting to Ricks.
Mm-hmm.
And he would talk to the negotiator, and the negotiator would say, we are going to do XYZ, and he's going to do ABC. And he'd go, okay, good. And then HRT would say, we want to fucking run over some cars. And he'd be like, all right, do that.
Yeah. Well, the other part of the HRT is there's a very interesting character in this, and it was the sniper guy. He was interesting.
Yeah, he was.
I liked him, but he was a little gung-ho for my taste. But at the same time, I get it. The kind of job he does is he's a fucking sniper. His job is there's bad guys, and I have a chance to take them out, and that's my job. I'm good at my job. and you have to have a very certain kind of mental makeup to do that specific job.
I thought it was really interesting, but also very kind of sad. I think he didn't outright say it, but I think he thinks it was a huge fuck up, a royal fuck up, if you will,
Mhm.
because he's talking about the moment where he had a clear shot of Koresh, but he did not have
The
a
clearance.
legal reason to fire.
Mhm.
And he really contemplated pulling the trigger, but decided that he should not because he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that he has some kind of lingering feeling of responsibility that because he chose his career and his freedom over taking that shot, things continued the way that they did and got so much worse. And I laughed when he said it, but I think it's actually he's like the only person who really humanizes anybody in there. There's a point after the fire, which, if you haven't seen the documentary, I apologize. We're jumping all over the place. But there's a part after that. He says he gets up and he's standing next to another one of the snipers, and a bullet goes between them. That somebody, as this place is fully engulfed in flames, was going to take one last shot. And he actually said, that's commitment. And he said it with like an air of respect.
Yeah, he did. And it was a kind of an odd moment to think that him realizing, oh, those people were just as committed as I am.
Right. And I think that it just really didn't seem like anybody else understood that.
Yeah, that was one of my notes was like, and that's later on in the documentary towards the end, obviously, but that was one of those things where you just like, you realize that mentality, that would not be my thought would be like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah, like almost like I thought it was over and it's not over. Yeah.
yeah. So, uh, speaking of the sniper, there was one part where the Branch Davidians had a 50 caliber sniper rifle, which is not a fucking easy weapon to get. That is a not an easy weapon to get. But apparently, this Koresh phoned the feds because they had a running dialogue with these negotiators, which had been going reasonably well. Because Koresh was not actually just like openly defiant; he was just like, okay, well, let's like try to. He actually was seemingly trying to release hostages and make things easier. Now, the feds make it sound like because of other things that happened later about he was just playing them regardless.
Yeah.
But he mentions that the Koresh says you have someone out over at this part, which is where the sniper guy was, watching us. What are they doing? Like, why are they advancing towards our property? Keep them away. And the negotiator said, well, yes, we do. We can try to get them to stop. And the sniper and the HRT team was furious that they gave up the knowledge that they were there. I'm like, they saw you. It's not like it's not like there's open field going towards this place. They're going to see you. Like, I don't know. I just thought that was
Well,
kind of
they're
like
not
ridiculous.
like on the top of a mountain in a ghillie suit. Like this is Texas. It's
It's
flat.
wide open. It's wide open. It's flat cattle fields. Like that's so. I just thought that was kind of ridiculous that they were mad that they were and like they saw you, dude. Like it's not like
Yeah, like this
you're
was
just
over before it started. Yeah.
yeah. So, do you want to, before we get into more of the FBI stuff with some of the more ridiculous things they did, I think we maybe should talk a little bit about the people who were survivors that were in there. It's because their story was part of this, and you mentioned some of them are still believers. So, give me your thoughts on what you think of them. There's Kathy, and then the
David
guy.
So
What's
David
that?
Thibodeau they are a
Yeah.
little bit weird about it. Like in the documentary, you can't really tell if he's a believer or not, but he is. He wrote a book. Um, that book was adapted into the drama series Netflix put out a while
Oh,
back. He is an open believer still. So even there's this weird thing at the end where he's talking about they did this and they did that and they believe this, and you kind of maybe think like, oh, maybe no, he's a believer. Um,
is that the guy that his mother was part of the doc?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, David Thibodeau, who like,
Thibodeau. I thought you said Simcoe, and I was a little confused.
oh,
Sorry.
sorry, yeah, I I mean, that thing is.
No, that's my brilliant partial deafness coming into play there. So yes.
But yeah, he was recruited to be in Koresh's band,
Yep.
and then fell under the spell and moved out to Mount Carmel. And he's still a believer, and I'm pretty sure that Kathy is too. Just the way that she talks about certain
It
things.
seems that way. It seems that way.
I think that a good portion of the reason that that is true is because of how this all went down, especially in Kathy's case.
Yeah, Kathy's case was hard. Also, we have to remember that Koresh did say that they were all going to die in a firefight, and maybe they see that as some sort of.
He was right.
He was right. His prediction was correct, so he
He's
could
a prophet.
foresee the future. Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
prophet. Prophet.
Yeah, it's really easy to be right.
Prophet in plain clothes.
Yeah, it's really easy to be right about the feds coming for you if you commit lots of federal crimes. But yeah,
Yeah, if you're an arms dealer, you can be pretty sure that at some point the feds are going to come knocking at your door.
but yeah, and I just always feel a little bit sad when you see people still hanging on after so long.
Yeah.
Like there are a few Heaven's Gate believers left. There are you and I actually got the idea to do this live stream after watching Wild Wild Country, and there's a guy in there that's a hardcore believer still.
Yeah.
And it feels very stuck in time and sad. And so that was my main feeling about the two of them, is that that's just really, really sad. And I think it also speaks to why I have a particular anger for people who I'm angry at everybody who's abusive for any reason.
Hmm.
I am particularly heated at people who do it in a spiritual way. I am not a religious person, but part of the reason I'm not a religious person is because I dealt with some spiritual trauma.
Hmm.
And I think you have an added responsibility to be ethical and treat people right when they believe that your salvation depends on the things you're saying to them. And so I feel like they never got to process that. They never got, like, because they were so galvanized by the events that there was no chance for them to, like, start picking it apart and realize that Koresh was full of shit and really process that and move on.
Yeah, I will say something about with Kathy, the idea that I agree. She's still in, and she made this very reverent speech, or just like this comment about how Koresh would do these very late Bible study kind of things, and very late, and all of the women would stay in the hopes that he would pick them to go to bed with him. And she had this very, like I said, reverent view of the night he told her to come with him, and she thought she was fucking God. That was what she thought. She thought, this is and she viewed it as him bestowing this gift to her.
She said he didn't do it for him, he did it for me. And it's like,
Wow. Yes.
it's like, honey, meet some more men, first of
Yes.
all. Because yeah, that really broke my heart when she said that, because it's just like it's so disconnected from any known reality, right? Like
Mhm.
nobody has sex altruistically.
Like, you can want your partner to be happy and be really focused on that. It's not a completely altruistic act. There's a bit of selfishness, but there's also a bit of, if you have the right partner, then it's playful and you want them to enjoy themselves as well. It's not totally
Right.
selfish,
Yeah, but like
but there is
again,
some selfishness to every one
most
that does it.
people who are that kind of lover, they're getting something out of giving as well. Like it's just funny to me. It's like I it's just never going to be an altruistic act. It just isn't. That's not how sex works.
Nope.
If you're not interested in it at all, especially as a man, you're not going to even be able to do it. Like it was just like I said. I'm not angry at her. I'm not blaming her. But it's like, the stuff that was going on, and we don't have like a whole lot of information on exactly what he was doing to manipulate these people, although late night Bible studies is probably one of them. It's just so far removed from any understanding of men in power, sex as it is understood in like all of the animal kingdom. Like it's just there's no reality involved in a statement of he wasn't doing it for him, he was doing it for me.
Yeah, and I would guess he probably made some statement to that effect. Like
Oh, cool.
that's what he put in her head. I'm doing this for you.
Mhm.
Look what a loving God I am, because he thought he was God. So, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. So, oh, I'm having sex with God. This is pretty incredible.
And you have to wonder if it was even like
You have to wonder if it's even good. Were you going to say that?
was because I feel like if you're running this whole like isn't this the best day of your life, your fucking God thing, like you have to really worry about being good at it.
Yeah. Or what the best would be if he like prematurely ejaculated and then was like God's seed.
God. I
Sorry, folks.
no, I started it. Ah,
Hey, that is a thought that went through my head too. Because whenever you have these cults where somebody is, and almost like Keith Raniere from Nexium and that fucking wingnut from Sarah Lawrence cult
mhm.
and all that, you have to wonder, were they good at sex, or was it just that they had such a stranglehold on these people's psyches that they thought it was good? I can't imagine any of them being actually good at sex. I just imagine that they just have this great strangle. I could be totally wrong.
You heard it here first. Our official stance is that cult leaders are bad at sex. But no, I agree because I think what it is like, so, like we accept, like we know, like sex is psychological and emotional as well as physical.
Hmm.
So, these people are in these, whipped into these psychological and emotional manipulations and like I don't even know the word. I like religious ecstasy almost, right? And so like it's just such an honor to be nominated, right? Like I just don't think that anybody was going to walk away and really like do the math on that afterwards because it doesn't matter if I enjoyed myself because God chose me that
Yeah, it's I don't know. Cult leaders are bad at sex. That's our official policy on the cult bar.
night. Yeah.
So
So don't fuck one,
yeah,
among
let's
other
just,
things that you shouldn't do with them, like
yes.
join their cult.
So I think we need to get a bit back to kind of the clusterfuckery of how this keeps going, because the government keeps fumbling the ball at every juncture on this. I mean, just every juncture. I think the negotiators are doing stuff as much as they can to try to bring hostages out. That's their goal. They want to bring as many people alive out as they possibly can. So one of the things is after the siege starts is Kresh basically demands that um, that a media presence to read his basically mini manifestos um, to what was it, Christian Broadcasting Network? Is that what it was?
Yeah. So, well, I'm under the impression that that did actually happen. They
Oh,
didn't
I believe it.
I think that did actually happen. I think he was allowed to do that because they have tapes.
Yep.
Now, granted, they could have just said it was happening and he's just doing it for the negotiator who's like, yep, you're totally on the radio. I don't know, but I think that it really happened, that they really did broadcast this stuff. And he played music and stuff, like, because he was a failed rock star. So, you know.
Always happens with the male ego where they can't get what they want.
Hmm. So,
Uh,
yeah, it's like he's. Well, first of all, they negotiate a ceasefire right after that first day.
yeah, and that
This
was actually that was one of the few good things they did was negotiated
I
ceasefire.
actually disagree, Doug, and I'm going to tell you why. They
You wanted
negotiate.
more gunfire?
They no, I wanted them to do it differently. They negotiate a ceasefire to get their guys out.
Mm.
They don't take anybody in need of medical attention from the compound. They don't even offer it.
I actually missed that.
Yeah. So they are, I mean, they're in rough shape. Don't get me wrong. Like you watch the documentary, they're like stacking people into ambulances. They are draping
And
people over the hoods of cars.
yeah, so
Um, but they didn't
they did it with they did it with the news media vehicle where they had 3 people in the car and one over the hood.
tell you too, like I hated those guys. Okay,
Me
so
too.
let's go back to that first question. How did the media know? Because the guy in the documentary, the journalist in the documentary says, his coworker calls him up, says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm getting ready to go to church." He says, "No, you're not. There's going to be an FBI raid at Mount Carmel, or an ATF raid because the FBI didn't come until later." Okay, and so they go, they get lost, they ask for directions. The guy says, "Why do you need directions? It's going to be a raid." Everything kicks off, and there's this kind of belief that if they hadn't gotten lost, everything would have been fine. But if you're kind of following the timeline, he arrives as the ATF is arriving. So
Mhm.
had he not gotten lost, he would have been there first, and they still would have known ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree. And
So, but anyway, I think that they told him. I think that
oh, the feds totally told them.
feds
Like
were the
they
tippers.
were
They wanted to be the heroes. They wanted to be seen on television doing something awesome because we fucked up 9 months ago.
yep, it's exactly an atonement for like a here's how hey, we fucked up at Ruby Ridge, but look how awesome we are now. And that's what that very much felt like. So
Bad
apparently not
call.
so awesome. Yeah, very
Yeah,
bad
bad.
call.
But yeah, so this guy's there because they asked him to be there. That is my firmly held belief. There is nothing in this world you can tell me to convince me otherwise. They
Yeah,
don't say
the
but
Branch
like,
Davidians, it
who the
has
fuck
to be them. It has to be them because
right,
the Branch Davidians got tipped off by the fucking people getting lost, so they didn't know.
right.
Like who the it has to be
They
the
wanted
feds
him
saying, "Come on."
there. They wanted him there. Shit starts going bad. They need him there because he's helping get these wounded agents off. Then you're fucking disgusting. Get out of here. What are you doing? This is a serious situation. We don't need the press here.
Yeah, and then they were like, "What are you doing here with your camera?" Like, "We were told to be here." Like,
We
yeah,
want
but
you here when we think we're looking good. We want you here when we need your help. But we just realized we look really bad and we really need you to leave. And we want to make you feel bad about being here.
and they to their credit, the news people hid the tapes so that they wouldn't be
They
confiscated
wouldn't
because and I will say that the Fed did a terrible job. If they were really trying to minimize, they would have searched everybody and made sure that didn't happen.
So one
But
of the things about the documentary, though, is that a lot of this was unreleased footage.
yeah, that was actually pretty cool because the stuff I have seen of Waco, I've never seen anything about this. Like when they're going through the raid, the bit at the beginning where they're talking about the raid itself, and they're getting footage of people like getting shot, like it's fucking live.
Yeah.
Now they interdisperse it with some CGI about like here's how the compound looks and all that shit because that compound doesn't exist like it did then. But like they were doing some CGI to mix it in, but it was really really well done on that end to kind of just it was really done to fill in gaps.
Yeah.
And but you see like the guy that got shot in the hip, he's like, yeah, there's me with the helmet with the red stripe on it, and I'm like, why the fuck are you putting a red stripe on your helmet? Like, do you want to get shot in the head?
Well, I
Like,
wonder too, though. I mean, you got to think like it's almost okay. So, like, if you go hunting, you wear camouflage, but you also wear orange because you don't want someone else who's hunting to shoot you. And I wonder if there's an element of like we're going in with body armor and guns to apprehend people who have body armor and guns.
mm.
So don't shoot me, shoot them. I don't know, but
But they also only thought they had 40 to 50 guns. So maybe that I don't know. To me, like, would you think if they have 40, 50 guns, would you think, oh, they also have body armor? I wouldn't. But I'm
well,
also
I mean, that's
I've
probably
also
like
I've never been in the military, so I don't know. Maybe that's just a natural precaution. For me, it wouldn't be, but
well, in the military we have rules we have to follow, unlike the federal government in this documentary. Another hot
there's
take
that.
from Renee. Um, yeah, I, I'm just like I say, I get really mad about it because again, I'm just gonna say this like over and over again for the whole episode. we have to have the element of surprise. They said that.
Yep.
Then the undercover agent comes in and is like, we no longer have the element of surprise. Oh, well.
Yeah, but we have so much overwhelming force. Let's just go in anyway. And like, that's so irresponsible. Just if you're a person who's actually concerned about the folks under your stead,
You don't do that.
well, fuck them. We need to go in and get them. And I'm like, yeah, part of it is if that's your job, then you kind of accept the risk of that. But at the same time, you should be smart about how much risk you take on. Like that was just a crazy amount of risk. They thought they knew, and granted, their intel was for shit because their fucking guy inside didn't know anything. But
Here's what I think, though, about that is I think that they didn't give it time.
yeah,
I don't know how long that guy was there,
yeah,
but
we don't get any background on that at all.
yeah, but not long enough to know that they were major weapons dealers with a million rounds of ammunition. It
Yeah,
wasn't on long enough to know that. I think that there's a sense, if you put all the pieces together, and you do need some outside information to put all the pieces together, but there's a sense that this was a rush job.
oh, very
And
much so.
and then there's this thing where they're there for the weapons, and it turns into this shootout, which turns into a siege. They bring the FBI in. Later, we find out that they did have reports of the child sexual abuse that was happening. That it wasn't a concern. And so, like, not to say it wasn't a concern. I don't know. It's a different.
It wasn't a big enough concern, apparently. No.
Right. So, but what I'll say is, like, there was a bit of this, because this is 30 years later. People are going to tell the story whatever way they've been telling it to themselves for 30 years. There's this sense you get from the guys who think they did everything right, that Koresh was just so evil and so volatile and so violent that this is all his fault and there was no other way it could happen. But those guys didn't know about the child sexual abuse. They didn't know about the amount of guns. They didn't know any of that. That is stuff they filled in to make themselves, to help them sleep at night
Yeah.
in the intervening years. And
Mhm.
that really pisses me off. Like, I just think, because you look at Ruby Ridge and you go, there were a lot of lessons that should have been learned there. And they just triple down on the bad decisions here.
They went heavy on it. Yeah.
And it's like, in here, they weren't wrong to go in. They were wrong to go in at Ruby Ridge. They weren't wrong to go in, but it's like, once again, it's like the opposite, right? So they think the Weavers have a million guns and they've got like 3. And they think the Branch Davidians have 40 or 50 guns and they've got like an
armory.
Yeah, like, I don't know what a million rounds of ammunition looks like.
None of us do.
So like, it's just really frustrating to see that, like, we're going to go in with force. We're going to bring in the same exact team with a new name, because the name changes everything, to fuck this thing up like they did at the last thing. And honestly, if you look at it, like, HRT did a better job in Ruby Ridge than they did at Waco.
Mm-hmm.
They at least tried.
Which is fucking weird.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it, is because they were like, full on, we're going to do whatever the fuck we want. We're getting angry. And you've got, Rix is upset at how much money it's costing, how long it's taking. And then you've got the actual negotiators like, guys, what is going on? You have to stop making this worse.
Which they did at every step. And, this is where we get into the idea of like the FBI negotiators, like the ones that were initially there, were doing a pretty good job.
Yeah,
the idea, like we talked about how, all Koresh wanted was his words broadcasting Christian Broadcasting Network. And every day, every time that happened, they would release 2 hostages. So for a series of days, they were getting 2 hostages, or it might have been multiple times that had multiple hostages a day. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And they were getting people released.
Most of them were the children.
Yes.
And also, here's something to remember, because, and Kathy points it out, and I think it is really important to remember. He was doing that at the cost of his members having complete faith in him.
Yeah, because he was telling parents to give up their kids.
And prior to that, you let your kids out of this building, they're going into Babylon, they're going to burn in hell. He was actually willing to go against his so-called beliefs because you never know what a cult leader really believes. He's willing to go against that. He was willing to upset his followers. He was willing to let the children go. And that I think is really important because we know in the end, he was the one that personally, physically caused the death of the remaining children. I don't think that was ever necessary. I don't think it was going to happen had they just kept the negotiation going. And this is what makes me mad is, well, it was costing us $1 million a day. Well, how much is your child's life worth, Mr. FBI agent? Because mine is worth more than $51 million to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it didn't have to take that long. They really didn't. If they had approached it with any sense, it would not have taken that long.
Yeah, it is really frustrating to see these guys doing this kind of work, and they're trying to negotiate and keep the flow of hostages coming out. Like, if they were hostages, even if they were acolytes, but they're, you know what I mean? They're still hostages. So what is I also found interesting, and we're gonna get into this because I want to get in the bit where Kathy gets surrenders. But
Yeah.
the idea of like the fact that they're talking to Kathy, they're also talking to his second in command, which his name is Steve Snyder, something to that effect. So it's not that they're just talking to Koresh, they're talking to multiple people. Now,
Right.
Steve is like his second in command. So Steve is the one who's kind of like filtering things when Koresh can't handle stuff. And Koresh is doing videos nonstop during this whole time.
He's also actively dying.
Yes, because he was shot like in this like a right above the hip, like in his midsection, which if you get shot in your midsection, that is bad news, bears.
Yeah, you're like packing it with tobacco and like really.
Yeah, very holistic method to try to fucking heal it, which, unfortunately for a bullet wound like that, that's not going to help. It's fine if you have surface level issues, but getting a bullet, that's not going to help. So somehow they get Kathy to surrender herself because one of the kids that was released was her kid. Three of her kids.
Yeah.
And her youngest one was actually the one where they used as a turning, like a knife point.
Yeah. So she had 3 kids there with her. 2 were hers with an ex. And they actually had split custody, which, oh my God, man. Can you imagine sharing someone in a cult? Like, I can't, like. But anyway, the 3 kids are released in like the first group of kids, which there was, I don't remember how many, but it was a group. It was more than just her kids. And the dad comes and gets the 2 that he can. And the toddler is left in this children's home.
Like it's CPS or something.
Yeah, and it's all Branch Davidian children. And he's depressed. And you can tell on the video, and it's really sad. And she is asking she opens that line of conversation. She says she can see the sad. And then they really turn the knife. And I'm going to say in that moment, I don't care. It's okay to manipulate somebody to get them out and save their life, especially if they open the door that they are concerned about their child's welfare. I don't care.
Yep.
But then, what happens next?
They arrest her. She gets to see her kid, and then she gets to talk to him, and the kid is happy to see his mom. And he's 2 or 3, I think. He's very young. And then they arrest her, and
they arrest her and announce that every single person who leaves will be arrested.
Yeah, which basically fucking hamstrings the negotiators yet again. Like, this is the thing. It's like you have this one.
Why would I leave now? Like, it's so mind-boggling.
Like, the left hand has no idea what the right is doing. Like the one hand wants to fucking drop the hammer, and the other one's like, "Hey, motherfuckers, we're trying to get these people out. You're telling them that we're going to arrest them. Why would they come out? Like,
we're going to drop their kids in a CPS situation if they let their kids out, and then if they come out to see their kids, we're going to arrest them." It's like, what? Who would take that offer? And I have to say, one thing that really upset me, and this is I think, a commentary on like the climate at the time. The children watched parts of the siege in
Hmm.
that group home. The caretakers had it on TV and were talking openly about it and in earshot of the children saying, these children's parents don't love them. That is cruel.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. And then Kathy was in, she says in a medical wing. I think probably psychiatric.
Me too.
And that's not a commentary on her. I mean, like,
No, she would fucking brainwashed as fuck. Like
even
that
if
makes
you weren't
sense.
even if you weren't brainwashed, you're under siege, your kids are taken away, and like it's traumatic. So anyway, the nurse comes when the fire starts, the nurse comes in and tells her to turn on the TV and shows it to her in, again, speculation, but in a psych ward. And if it wasn't the psych ward, you're just setting her up to need one if
Yeah.
she's not already there. This was just like, to me, unbelievable, like, crisis of care with the people. I mean, it's just, yeah, I can't find the words. That is how upsetting it was to me, especially with the children. But like, yeah. And you have that woman who's an adult now, whose father died of a gunshot wound.
Hmm. In Yeah, because he was shot in the initial raid, and that's the other thing. Koresh and several people survived gunshot wounds that lasted 51 fucking days with gunshot wounds that were probably infected as fuck. Like I'm not sure how so many of them actually survived, and even though holistic methods can delay things, like gunshot wound's a gunshot wound. Like when one girl, Heather is her name, and Heather Jones was her name, and she left. She saw her dad, and her dad was fucking dying. Like he was shot. He was not doing great.
Well, we don't know how long he lived after that. We
We
just
don't.
know
We
he
don't. We don't
played
know.
the
But
last phone
he was
call,
not in a good
and it
way.
was heartbreaking. Um, Watching someone have a breakdown like that is not cool. Like,
No.
Heather, when she's listening to the phone call. But yeah, it's like, I again, it comes down to, like, I don't care what you think about the adults that were in there. We knew there were children in there. And when you know that the kids are being released and then being shown this violence happening to their only family that they know on television by the people who are supposed to be protecting them, and then the kids that are in there are being subjected to all the torture tactics. They were playing, and this is legitimately a torture tactic, by the way, playing loud music at them 24/7 to deprive them of sleep. They played like random noises for 24 hours at a time. I
Mhm.
mean, they were doing everything they could to literally drive the people inside crazy. Like, I can't take this anymore. I have to leave. But there were children in there that were being subjected to the same thing. The sniper guy even said he was so close to the speaker, it was driving him crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm sure a 4-year-old can deal with that. I'm sure the 4-year-old's been to SEER school and is totally immune to sound,
Torture tactics. Yeah.
torture tactics, sleep deprivation, all that. Then they decide to fucking tear gas. Again,
Yeah.
there's children in there.
Yeah. And they warned them. They warned them. Hey, we're going to throw tear gas in there. And I'm
They
like,
like drove a freaking Bradley through the front door first too. Like, again,
well, they
when the
also
shit
drove. They
gets
also, when they were releasing hostages too, there was also a point where they said everything was going great, and then HRT decided we're just going to take our tank and drive over their cars.
well, that was the no more hostages left after that. After HRT just decided everything's going really well, people are leaving, let's just destroy their shit.
I was that before or after the lawyer showed up, because the lawyer also comes into play here. Who was it? Koresh's mother talks to this lawyer and says, "Like, can you represent my son?" And
I think it was after he showed up. Yeah, according to your notes, it's after.
yeah, I think it shows up after. But this lawyer guy, who's apparently is like a legendary criminal defense attorney in Texas, decides I'm going to go in. Let me go in. And the feds are like, fuck that. And then he's like, no, if you want me to try to get people out, I can help you with that, but you need to let me go in. And I need to, and they're like, well, you can't take any weapons. He's like, I wasn't gonna.
Yeah.
So
It
he
turns
goes in.
out when you finally let the third party guy in, usually people are fine with that.
Seems like a recurrent theme with like Ruby Ridge in this place. I don't know. But anyway, that guy goes in, and one of the things I remember him saying that I thought was really interesting and gross was that when he went in the door, they opened the door for him, and he said it smelled like sewage and garlic because they were using garlic as a holistic means to heal wounds, and it smelled like sewage because one, rotting bodies, and two,
Literal sewage.
little
Yeah.
sewage.
Yeah.
But
Children in there.
what's that?
And there were children in there
And
living
there
there.
were children.
And this is the other thing, we didn't say it when I started, we got like kind of caught up in it, but when the gunfire started, they didn't know where the children were. And there are reports, people getting their kids dressed with bullets coming through the window.
Mhm. Yes, several of the
They
folks said that.
knew there were children in there. They didn't know where the children were, and they opened fire on that building.
Yep. So fuck off with the "we're concerned for the children" shit, which they pulled later, but was
Yeah.
nonsense.
Well,
Um,
that was pre tear gas because they had to get special permission to use tear gas, and they went to Janet Reno and showed her the reports of child sex abuse, but they didn't show her the videos of the children inside that were seemingly pretty okay. And she signed off on it. But again, I just want to point this out. Janet Reno doesn't get any fucking slack from me. They're like, well, she was manipulated. I mean, maybe she was, but she knew there were children in there.
yep.
And she signed off on a fucking war crime knowing there were children in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Reno gets no slack. I agree. One of the things I want to talk about with the lawyer a bit too is the idea that, he made a comment that he thought Koresh seemed reasonable, which is interesting in that when you hear him talking to the feds, he doesn't sound completely unreasonable,
No.
but at the same time, that could be some of that thing that we've talked about before, where somebody has the right tone and sounds
Well,
like they're being reasonable in the middle of a fucking crisis kind of deal.
I think too, it's just like you have to understand that I think the lawyer understood what was going on better than the FBI by like a lot. And he understood that to the people inside Mount Carmel, what was happening to them was unconscionable and completely unreasonable. And so, they were kind of entitled to react however they felt like, because this is an invasion of their private space, their rights are being violated, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you
Mhm.
hear that. They have recording from the inside, and you hear people saying, that's our personal private property. They're not allowed to do that. So for him to be willing to negotiate at all, I think comes across as very reasonable given the situation. It's kind of the same thing with, again, with the Weavers. You see that as soon as they got a third party negotiator in there, they surrendered. And you think they surrendered after their kid and their wife were murdered.
Yeah.
What would have happened if you just went in and talked to them before that? What would have happened if when David Koresh opened that door and walked out, instead of opening fire, they talked to him? And unfortunately, we'll never know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I will say also the lawyer actually managed to start negotiations up again where they actually released a lot more hostages than they ever released, even in like the first day he's there. So it's like I think my notes were March 21st, which was day 22. They released the largest amount of hostages they released at all. And when we talked earlier about HRT, after they released all these hostages, HRT decided to take their tanks and start running over their cars. Well, that was the fucking end of the hostage negotiations. That was them saying, "Oh, you want to do that? Well, why are we releasing people when you're just going to do this kind of super
Yeah.
reckless
You're
fucking
arresting
thing?"
them. You're destroying our property. Like HRT just kept turning the heat up while every time the negotiator got anything done. And didn't he said, it just wasn't happening fast enough for them. And it's like, yeah, well, negotiations don't happen fast.
Yeah,
They don't happen fast when you're negotiating about money. They certainly don't happen fast when you're negotiating about lives.
Mhm. Yeah, it's super frustrating because it seemed like there were times when it was actually the negotiation part was actually working pretty well.
Yeah.
And then it just like repeatedly the FBI negotiator would be doing things, and then the other branch, the HRT, would be doing something just like their of their own accord, just like let's do something to really fuck this up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it was intentional. I think they didn't understand what the FBI was like. The negotiators were doing. They just thought, well, these people are still in there. We need to get them out. Like, even the sniper said, like, if I like that point where he thought he could kill Koresh with the snipe, he was like, if I do this, all these people come out, and I'm like, you don't fucking know that. You don't know that at all. Like those people are like super devoted to that guy. Do you think you do that? No. Well, okay. Well, he's dead. Let's all come out. I
Yeah,
think that I think some of them would have really dug their heels in if that was the case. Like I
I
don't think that
agree. I think the fact that he got injured is part of the reason people were
stayed
less
as much
likely
as
to
they
come
did.
out. But I also think that this is the thing, right? Is like everything they did proved Koresh right to his followers. Everything they did, I mean, it's almost like the most warped team building exercise ever, right? Like everything they did was going to make it so that they were trauma bonding even harder, so that they were rallying against the enemy even stronger, so that they were less likely to come out, less likely to trust these people with their children, more devoted to the cause. Every single thing HRT did served that purpose. And
Yep.
it is insane to see it keep happening. And at no point does Rix, who's in charge of the whole situation, say, what the fuck are you doing? Stop. At no point does he say, hey, don't make any more moves without clearing it with me because the negotiators are making progress. He didn't care.
Yeah. One of the things that we kind of glossed over the idea that they brought tanks into this.
Oh, yeah. I was just like, and then they ran a tank through the front
And
door.
then they brought in Abrams tanks, which
I
like
thought
you
they were
know,
bad.
the reason they brought the Abrams tanks in because they had a 50 caliber sniper, and Abrams tanks are not resistant to it, but can absorb some of that fire.
They're so, okay. Okay. So insulting to your intelligence in this documentary too, because the guy says something like a 50 caliber sniper round can flatten one of these tanks. No, it can't. That's not true at all. Why would you say that? Like anybody couldn't Google that. I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't have to Google it because I got my ground intelligence husband who works, when the Marine Corps still had tanks, worked with them, and I was in a tanks unit, and we're like,
What?
what?
I know the 50 cal is a pretty powerful weapon. I didn't think it could floor a tank. That was something, even as a civilian, like maybe my Call of Duty training is coming in there, but it feels like that's a little bit of a falsehood. So yeah.
You can literally shoot. I've done it. I paid good money to do it in Vegas. You can shoot a 50 cal through a pistol. Um,
What?
yeah,
How much
it's.
of a kick was that?
I mean, I didn't hit shit, and it's very expensive, so they don't let you try a whole lot. I think I got like 3 rounds for what I paid. But it's like lock, stock, and two smoking barrels. Desert Eagle .50. Yeah,
Yep.
that's a 50 caliber pistol. It depends on what you put the 50 caliber round in, first of all. And it also isn't just about the size, it's about what the tip is made out of. And
Mhm.
also, no 50 caliber anything flattens a tank because it's a round. You can hold it in your hand. It's not a round, it's a single bullet. Like I think I said this to you, I'm not sure, but I said it to my husband like a lot. I felt like I was watching a propaganda film for a lot of it.
You were.
It was just like, that is not true. And it's not true. Why? What in the fuck is going on here? Like, it's not an explosive, it's not an incendiary, it's not going to blow anything up.
It's not an RPG. It's fucking bullet.
I hated these guys, Doug.
Yeah. What I wanted to get to
If it
is
hasn't
the
been clear.
tanks, but the tank thing that just really interested me was how the HRT head was a guy named Jeff Jamar. Jeff Jamar was not a good guy in this story at all either. He was, I think he's kind of the
Worse than
driving force.
Rex.
I think he's kind of one of the driving forces for HRT doing all the weird shit they did.
Yeah.
But he made the comment that with the Abrams tanks, he goes that you could drive that tank from one end of the compound to the other. And he goes, and the guy that told us is a negotiator. He's like, and he made this motion. And I'm like, I don't know why that was important, but I thought that was funny. And then he goes, he could drive from one end of this compound to the other, meaning like it could decimate everything and just run over everything. And one of the negotiators said, well, why the hell would you do that? And then the next day, that guy was not a negotiator there anymore. He was sent away.
He was the first guy who had built trust with Koresh, who had made progress. And they're like, hey, you had this training thing you were supposed to do, so you're going to go do that. And actually, it's weird, right? Because you get the sense when he's talking that he was upset by that. He did not want to leave. He wanted to stay and finish the job. I think that that was the best thing that could have happened to him for his mental health. Because it was not, the negotiators had no power there at all. It was not going to get better. If he had stayed, I think that he would bear even more, because he's one of the only people who had any remorse or guilt. I think he would have borne even more guilt over how things went, because he would have been an active part of it when it went really bad.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there for the really bad part. That's my take on it. I mean, I think, you know, his guilt or his desire to want to finish what he started is like understandable and legitimate. And I'm sure it does cause him a lot of pain. But I couldn't imagine if he felt that bad about leaving, how bad would he have felt about staying?
Yeah, he's one of only two people out of the Fed that I felt like really had any remorse or regret about any of it. And he seemed like one of the quote unquote sane folks who wasn't just about let's just fucking take these people off the map kind of deal.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think you're right. I think you're right. If you'd have stayed, that would have fucked him up.
I'm gonna look up that sniper's name because I had it and I forgot.
Yeah, again, snipers are. What's that?
The sniper that is featured throughout is Chris Whitcomb. I feel he's really he's a hard read. I think he does have some remorse over it. Some of the things he was saying about the end.
Yeah.
When he was standing there and the rounds were going off and the Bible pages were falling. But I think he's a guy who guards his emotions very carefully. So it doesn't show as much as it shows with some of the other people who speak.
Yeah, but there is a moment where he kind of has this weird glee of the tank noise when it comes in and the tear gas. There's like a weird moment where he's like kind of giddy about it. And that part I really didn't dig, but I get what he does.
Well, and it's still, my husband pointed this out, and because they don't say this in the documentary, but I think my husband's right. At that time, most of those guys were former military guys.
Yeah.
And most of them had not seen combat because we weren't at war.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element there of like, some of this is like, okay, here's a weird example. I don't know if you guys, anybody watched Mindhunter, but there's a point at which like they were
Mindhunter
hoping for the case to turn, and then it did, and then they're like, oh, actually, I didn't hope for that. You know, I think there's an element of that with these guys who like all this training and now it's happening and it's exciting. And like, because I got to tell you, I worked for a tanks unit. I didn't get to like drive one or ride in one, but I worked for one, and it is incredible. Like, it's a very visceral thing. They are big. They shake the ground. They're bigger than anything you've like seen, you know, like on the road. It's exciting even when they're just like driving them by to wash them. And so I can see that like being like a very visceral excitement. And then, you know, later, maybe it's 5 seconds, maybe not, maybe it's longer. You're like, oh no, this is bad. You know, like this, they shouldn't be here. This means things got really bad. So I can kind of understand that. And like I said, like he's just so guarded. He's very much like what you'd expect a sniper to be.
Yeah, you know? they play everything close to the best. It seems like I don't know a lot of snipers. Let's just say that. Like I just get the sense that they're kind of this like I said, a different breed of human. Like they have this very specific job, which their job is to kill other humans
Well,
with
and
a
I think
very
it's been 30 years, right? And
yeah,
he didn't have direct involvement in anything that happened. He was just there.
yeah,
And 30 years is a long time to get over the emotions of being there, where
mhm.
it's maybe not as much time to get over the emotions of having an active part in the things that happened.
Yeah, that's fair. Like he actually didn't think we learned he didn't fire any shots.
Yeah,
So it wasn't
was
he
there.
he could have and he toyed with it, but yeah, he didn't do that. So I don't know. He again, it's one of those guys where I liked him and I disliked him all at the same time. Like
I
there
also
are
think
parts,
there's a sense with that, with the tear gas thing, is they thought, I don't think they knew they had gas masks for a start.
yeah,
But I think they thought, well, this is it. They're all coming out because nobody can withstand that.
hmm
But they had gas masks, so they didn't.
yeah. It is. Question about the gas mask. um, how is throwing tear gas into a building with people in it not an assault?
It is. That's why they had to have special permission.
And that's what I'm saying. Is like I get they got special permission, but still, like,
Literally considered a war crime.
yeah,
Yeah, no, and that's why I say like the military has rules. The thing that I found very interesting, because I've done gas chamber training. Like you have to do it once a year, I think. And I was in for
that
6 years.
that sounds not fun.
No, and it isn't at all. But they did everything right. The people with masks put the mask on. People who didn't have masks, they did cloth, and they had water ready for rinsing. Um, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were ready. And then to say we're gonna throw tear gas in, that gave everybody time to get ready. Because the thing about the gas chamber that sucks is you have to sit there with your mask off for a minute and then put it on when you're told to, because they want you to experience what it is like, so that if it happens to you, you can operate with snot running out of your face and stuff, right?
Okay,
But they had warnings, so they just put their stuff on. They didn't need to deal with it. They didn't have to have the moment of holy shit, there's tear gas.
yeah. What is the effects of tear gas as someone who has actually experienced it?
Um, it's mostly gross. It burns like a motherfucker. Um, somebody every year learns not to go to the bathroom immediately after because it burns. But mostly it hurts really bad, it burns really bad, and then your body just produces mucus. Like you've got like really disgusting like snot rockets just coming out, like thick yellow nasty stuff. And again, like the only way you're going to get relief is clean water, like fresh clean water, until it's all rinsed off of you. And then you're still going to be snotting, and like you got to wash your clothes. If you try and wear your clothes again, you'll get really burny and itchy. um, the NBC guys that are in charge of these trainings, like they're kind of, they're a special kind of guy or gal. I only met guys, but they'll like keep a pack of cigarettes in their pocket for it, and then bum
Light
them.
up afterwards.
No, they'll bum a cigarette to somebody else and watch them just like, So my my bartender has come in with a second drink.
This is my question, Lauren. Like, if you're not prepared for that, like, yeah, but you said like they got special permission from Janet Reno to be like, yeah, let's go do this.
Yeah, no problem. It's all
Yeah,
good.
and I just look at that like it. I'm going to say that as a civilian who has never experienced this, it reminds me a bit of like waterboarding. Like,
It's not that bad. I say this, like, I mean, I've never been waterboarded, but what I understand of waterboarding, it's I have really bad allergies, and I've taken a shower when I couldn't breathe, and I feel like waterboarding is that times 100, right?
yeah,
Anyway, the thing about tear gas is that it really, really fucking like I'm not for a second gonna say it's not bad. It really sucks. It is really painful. And they were saying something like they had enough tear gas to go for like 4 days. that would probably actually kill people because you're breathing. It would, it would be, you couldn't get it out of your lungs. You'd be choking on the mucus production. Like it would be very, very bad for an extended period of time. But in and of itself, it is really like if you get away from the gas and you rinse with clean water, it's kind of over. And that's part of the reason that it gets used in like riot situations and stuff, because it's really hard to hurt somebody seriously with tear gas. It is not hard if you tear gas them for 4 days straight, which was sounded like was the plan, until they realized that because we shot this building so full of holes and the wind is blowing, the gas is just going away. Which again, these people didn't plan for fucking anything. Like they weren't even doing their bad ideas well.
Hey, I have a bad idea. Well, let's just do it worse. Not
Right,
great. I'd sign me up.
That's part of what really drove me crazy, Doug, because it's like, well, this is a really bad idea.
Let's double down.
But like if you had a bad idea and you did it well, then it's like, well, you were just misguided. Like nobody's ever been in this situation before. Who could say? Maybe you thought it was a good idea at the time. But when you execute a bad idea poorly, you are just incompetent. So
I don't have I can't agree with you more. Like it seemed like just fucking dumb idea after dumb idea after dumb idea, right? Like it just compounded itself. Back to the lawyer just for a smidge.
okay.
There was a point, like I know we do this, and I love that we kind of sidebar into all those things because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
There was a bit with the lawyer had made progress and they crushed the cars, blah blah blah, and the lawyer was worried that they were going to get sniped. That was a worry of his. And then finally, before they start doing the tear gas, the FBI told the lawyer, "We don't need you anymore. We're like." He's a lawyer. He's their lawyer. Like, how is that legal?
Well, so here I do think it is, and this is why, because they weren't under arrest.
That's fair. That's fair. But like,
Right? So like
if they were going to be arrested, like it felt like
yes, because here's my thing is I feel like the spirit of the law says if I say you can have a lawyer, I'm not allowed to take your lawyer away once you've had it. I feel like that's the spirit of the law. Like if cops think I'm involved in something, they call me in for questioning, and I say I'm not talking to you without a lawyer, which by the way, that's what you should always say no matter what, even if you're just a witness. I don't give a shit. Free advice.
Lawyer up right away.
Yeah, I don't care. Like you want to give
They're not your friend in that situation at all.
Yeah.
Ever.
Anyway, if I say I want a lawyer and they go, okay, well, like, they try and talk me out of it, etc. My lawyer shows up. And then I say, okay, with advice from my lawyer, I'll give my statement or I'll answer your questions. If they don't like what my lawyer is telling me, they can't be like, all right, you got to go.
Yep.
And that's regardless of whether I'm under arrest or not. So I feel like once they said, yeah, you can have a lawyer, you know what I think it was? It's like they knew that they were violating all sorts of constitutional rights. Not the one that they mentioned in the documentary, though, oddly enough. Not that one. That was like the only constitutional right that they didn't violate.
True.
Me and John just looked at each other like, well, no.
So, all right. So we're at the tear gas point, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the other thing I didn't understand was they're tear gassing the place. At the same time, are they ramming the tanks into the building at the same time?
They weren't really clear. I was like confused by that. What I think is that they drove the tank like in through the front door and then started tear gassing. That's what I think. But they weren't really clear in the documentary. It was kind of weird.
But regardless, the idea is like they were ramming the tanks at the front door and other various parts of the building there was a big fucking battering ram on it. And are you not concerned that the building is going to collapse if you're worried about the children involved?
Well, they weren't. I mean, I just think it's like
clearly it's another instance where they go, well, yeah, we're concerned about the children, but not really.
Yeah, it was so They're literally torturing American citizens' children. That's literally what's happening. All the loud music and the barnyard sounds and all the other shit they were playing, tear gas, shooting. I mean, it's just like,
destroying the structure of buildings so that they're less stable.
and again, you drive a fucking tank through a wall and you don't know what's on the other side of the wall. It could be children because children are in there. This is like, I just kept coming back to it where it's like, I get that they think that these people all deserve everything they get. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that
Agreed. I
the
agree with
vast
you.
majority of members of a cult are victims. The vast majority. But even if I didn't believe that, 5-year-olds don't get to decide whether or not they're going to join a cult if their parents do. I know
Well,
it's so
ma-
dark. It's
but handcuffed into this too was the idea that like we'd see like these press conferences that the FBI is doing, and then like when this is all happening, the FBI is like, "Yeah, we're not negotiating. We're done. This is coming to an end." Like that's their fucking stance. This isn't about bringing people out. It's like, we're done negotiating.
well, and I think again, like they left so much context out of this. I think like you and I were alive for it when it was on the news. Not 24/7 because we didn't have 24-hour news at the time besides CNN. You'd have cable for 24-hour news. But at 7, 11, 3, 6, and 10. This is on the
Mhm.
news live. And we didn't see a lot of it.
Mhm.
So anybody younger than us doesn't know shit about it, right? And like, I'm going to I'm going to hurt everybody's feelings, okay? And I'm sorry. If you were born in the year 2000, you are 23 years old right now. And you're definitely old enough to be watching cult documentaries on Netflix.
As you should.
And plenty of people younger than you are old enough to be doing that. This "we don't negotiate with terrorists" thing plays a massive role in what happens, and they don't bring it up at all.
Yeah, and that was a very big thing then.
Yeah, and so because what it was, right, is he tells the lawyer he wants to finish his personal translation of the Book of Revelations.
Yeah, which is bonkers in its own way, but okay.
Yeah, and then that's when they say we're not negotiating anymore. And I think that was directly, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's an important fact if you don't have that context, which I feel like a lot of people watching this documentary are not going to have that context.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are younger would think that the we don't negotiate with terrorists is like a George W. Bush thing. It was not. It was way earlier than that. So yeah.
And
Oh,
I think they were.
go ahead. Sorry.
I think they were homeland terrorists.
Oh, agreed.
Sure. And speaking of terrorists, homeland terrorists, there's a cameo that I was waiting for.
Please, you tell this because you were the one that wanted to drop this, and please do.
I know. Well, I learned about it on Cult Podcast, but we're sitting there, and I'm just enraged, right? Like I'm just so angry, and up pops Timothy McVeigh, and that was like one moment where I wasn't angry because I was like, "Oh, they did it! There he is!" And then I was like, "Oh no, that's angering too. That's really sad." So yeah, this became a total clusterfuck on the other side of the barricade as well. Much like at Ruby Ridge, there was a collection of white nationalists, locals, news people, etc., but on a scale comparable to how much bigger Waco was than Ruby Ridge, right? And so Timothy McVeigh was literally there selling bumper stickers, which is what he did on the gun show circuit.
Mhm.
So he just showed up to sell anti-government bumper stickers. And as you pointed out, Oklahoma City happened on the anniversary of the beginning of Waco. The end, sorry.
The end of Waco, and that was his symbolic take on it. Like when Oklahoma City bombing happened, it was the day Waco ended.
Right.
And I didn't realize that when the documentary made that point. I was like, oh shit. Okay.
It's interesting, and this is like a bird walk a little bit, so I apologize, but it's interesting. I was saying this to my husband too. Um, we didn't hear a lot about what Timothy McVeigh was thinking, wanting, doing, because there was a time in our nation's history that if you were a homeland terrorist, you were a white nationalist, and you did something bad, everybody agreed that you were a piece of shit and we don't care about you.
Hmm.
And so my memories of after Oklahoma City happened and they caught Timothy McVeigh is you couldn't speak his name without somebody spitting on the floor, somebody getting angry, and it didn't matter
Hmm.
what their political background was.
Yep.
Right? I don't think that is true anymore. I mean,
I
definitely
don't either.
people I hang out with, but like, in general, there's some weirdness there. But I never put together those dates because I don't think anybody ever brought it up. We heard about the Turner Diaries. We heard that he was a white nationalist. We didn't really hear that there was like a direct connection to
No.
Waco. And I
Yeah.
think part of that is because the PR machine about Waco had to be that it was all the Branch Davidians' fault and not the federal government's fault. And we don't even want to mention that this guy thinks it's the federal government's fault. And then maybe is bordering on conspiracy theory, but I think it's a reasonable guess.
Yeah. And I think McVeigh's thing was basically he was very anti-government, and
Oh
that
yeah.
the idea. So that ties into a thing we need to talk about before we kind of get to a point where we start wrapping up. Is the idea of this Waco being this very big rallying point for far right wing 2A. I call them wing nuts because they're just, to me, they're so far beyond the pale that they don't have common sense. But this is McVeigh's reasoning. This is the whole thing. This is, well, that was government overreach. So, we're at this point where people who are 2A proponents, like really staunch 2A proponents for gun rights, view Waco and to a smaller degree Ruby Ridge, which, if we're being honest, I think Ruby Ridge is a bit more of a compelling case, but it's
Right. You need to
smaller.
flip it. Yeah.
I think Ruby Ridge is a far more compelling case for them than Waco is. But like, this is like a sort of rallying cry. We've seen actually politicians.
We've seen one.
There's probably more that just think the same way. But yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant because Trump himself held a rally at the airport in the middle of the 30th anniversary, and the airport was a like control center.
mhm.
It was the airport in Waco was like a very important site during the siege.
Yeah, it was a. I believe you're right. I think it was the control center was at the airport. I think they said that in the documentary that was where they kind of had a rallying point to kind of get it because it was like 8 miles away from the actual Branch Davidians
Yeah, they
compound.
had two like abandoned houses, and then they had like their main control center was at the airport.
Yeah. Also, the two sites were Sierra 1 and Sierra 2. So, what's Sierra? Why is Sierra
Um,
the name for that? That's got to
because
be a
it's
military
phonetic
parlance.
alphabet. Yeah, it's the phonetic alphabet.
Yeah, I figured it was military parlance there, but um, all right. Some other things we need to touch on.
There's a lot
All
of
right,
them.
we're getting to the end of the documentary, and they're sort of doing their wrap up and talking to everybody and doing all this stuff. And this fucking guy, I don't know if that was Rick's.
It
It
was.
wasn't Rick. Was it Rick's? Who said that the FBI people were the real
They're the
hostages.
real hostages.
I
Um, do you want to do the honors on like the numbers, or do you want me to do it,
the numbers were 82 Branch Davidians, and
including
including 28 children died.
and how many FBI agents died?
No FBI agents, 4 ATF agents died. Just 4 ATF.
They were the
Just
real
four.
victims.
Four deaths are not great. That's bad.
No, I'm
But,
not. You know,
but the Branch Davidians lost 82 people. But the FBI, who lost
including
nobody,
kindergarten classrooms worth of children.
mhm, and the FBI were the hostages because Koresh was this mastermind.
Mhm.
Fuck that guy. Fuck
When
him.
he said that, I swear to
That about maybe would throw my fucking controller at the TV.
what's
Like when
really
he's
funny too is before we even got there, right? Because I watched one episode at a time because it was just like right, and we were starting at episode 3, the final episode, and my husband goes, "Is there a particular reason why this is the Waco documentary we have to watch?" And I was like, "Unfortunately, yes." Like, because he was sick. I mean, I think he was sick of what bullshit the documentary was, but also me just like for a half an hour after the episode ended, just like going out in the front yard to chain smoke, like, "Rah, rah, 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 what the fuck?" You know, like, anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's enraging. It's just like I said, okay, David Thibodeau claims that the FBI started the fire. And there was like a moment where I was like, "Oh shit, like, you know what? I'd believe it." But then they have actually a recording of someone talking about moving gas cans around,
Yep.
um,
And multiple fires started at the same point
at the
of
same
time.
time, right? Which could have still been the FBI. Like that alone could have been the FBI, but you hear people inside the building talking about it. So the story, as I understand it, which again, they don't get into this part on the documentary, which is super weird because this is the part that really shows you how fucking evil David Koresh is.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, they left this part out.
They could have really hammered that point home with this.
They moved when the tear gas came. They moved everybody into that bunker in the basement.
Yep.
Then they left the children in that bunker in the basement, and then they lit the whole fucking thing on fire, knowing the children were in the basement.
Mhm.
David Koresh did that on purpose. He knew they were there. It wasn't oopsie daisy, the house caught on fire. It was on purpose. He purposefully murdered those 28 children and everybody else who didn't get out. But I still think that Ricks is responsible for the deaths of those 28 children as well, because at every fucking opportunity he had to get those kids out, he did something that made the Branch Davidians more likely to keep those kids in.
Yep.
And it was
Agreed.
his job to get them out.
Yeah. I agree. Like he had opportunities to get them out. The negotiations were working and they just sabotaged that along every fucking route they possibly could. So yeah. While he didn't start the fires, he enabled all the thought processes to go to let's just start the fires. Fuck it, because we're all gonna die here because that's what's God foretold.
And
Um,
also, I mean, here's the thing: if you're like on the fence about whether or not we're all going to die here, when they start shooting bullets into a house where your children are, when they start tear gassing your children, when they start ramming tanks through the walls in the house your children are in, I don't think anybody would consider you crazy to think that your life was at risk.
yeah, or your kid's life was at risk, and that
Right.
person that telling you your kids or life's at risk by those people. Why would you not think that if this is what fucking happening right in front of you? Like I could see that completely, right?
And that's it. Is like I know that like this is like 1993,
93.
1993. 92 was Revere, sorry. This is 1993. We were just coming off the idea that you could just kidnap people away from cults and like tough love them into not being in a cult anymore. And it's
So
only
much
been
of the
recently that
work.
we understand how fucking crazy it is to think that. So like I get it. Like they didn't know what we know. They didn't have like a way to understand how cult thinking works. But you do know, especially if you're former military, which a lot of these guys were, that when someone starts attacking you and attacking your family and attacking your children, you will fight back. You don't enter negotiations when your life and your children's life are at risk. Everybody fucking knows that. You don't have to be like a expert in cult psychology to know that.
No, you do not.
And you definitely don't get people to come out if you're like, come out, and then we'll arrest you immediately. Fuck you.
The other thing I want to talk about is the idea
Don't be
that
emphasized in this
we have
episode.
to we have to talk about one other thing. Is so we talked about Kathy, who we both believe is just a believer
Mhm.
and still is. And her comment was that The loss of lives was acceptable.
Yeah.
That
I
was the
think
word she used, was acceptable.
Thibodeau had a more nuanced view. I'll give him that. He said they were martyrs and they died for what they believed in and they died for their God. Um, I disagree, but I can respect that opinion. I can respect that opinion even from somebody who didn't believe, right? Like it's just like that is what was happening in their experience. That's what they were doing. But in it's not acceptable. And you know what? It's easy to say when it wasn't your kids, right? Her kids got out.
Yeah. Yeah. So a problematic documentary to say the least.
Yeah,
And
so I would definitely suggest that if you were as angry about this documentary as Doug and I are, or you're just interested in like anything that isn't propaganda up to the last second, where they're like, "Oh, and then they really fucked up." It's like, no, they've been fucking up the whole time. Um, the cult podcast series on Waco is really great. Starts with Ruby Ridge, goes through the siege, and then actually they pick up with Timothy Timothy McVeigh's story. They do. It's very long. It's a time investment. It's very good. I preparing for this, I only re-listened to the Ruby Ridge episode because I really needed that information. Like I couldn't remember the details, but the whole series is really good. Fair warning: the Timothy McVeigh episodes are unhinged. They are very I don't know how to. They're very funny, which is maybe not everybody's cup of tea when it comes to very serious topics. But I mean, that's what Cult Podcast does, right? They put a light spin on it so you can get they put the cheese on the vegetables so you can choke them down. But there's a lot of good information. It's very well researched, and I can't recommend it enough because this documentary was it well like we had to start out with like 25 minutes of context before we could even get into what happened in the documentary, which is BS.
yeah.
So yeah, and there's a documentary on Ruby Ridge as well on PBS, and I cannot remember the name of it, and I didn't watch it, but I intend to because it does interest me as more context. But yeah,
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Ruby Ridge one doesn't strike me as more of a cult thing. It's just
yeah,
because,
I'm just saying like for people at home who are interested, you can go check that out. We're not going to cover it because they weren't a cult; they were just kind of weird and victims of some heinous shit.
yeah. So I think we can agree that Waco in general was a pretty big clusterfuck, or
It
a royal fuck up. Yes, as the drink implies. So yeah. So we're coming up in 2 hours, which is generally when we start wrapping things up. How about you share what we're going to talk about next month?
Okay. It's one of my favorite things is these micro cults, like when we covered
Mm,
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
yeah.
Um, I didn't know that this was about a micro cult when I watched it. I thought it was like just true crime. And it is a little bit true crime, but
Oh,
basically this very talented vegan chef falls under the influence of a guy who, given any more time, probably would have had a pretty significant cult following behind him. He manipulates her. He manipulates a guy I'm pretty sure is in the Russian mob.
oh,
Don't
jeez.
wait for your opinion on that, Doug. When you watch it, there's lots of weird spiritual abuse and strange beliefs, and it's been a while since I watched it, so I don't want to go like I don't want to say what I think it is he's telling her because it could be wrong. But it's a good one, and it's not very long, and it's got everything. It's got food. It's got money laundering. It's got guy who's probably in the
Apparently,
Russian.
mafia.
Yeah. Um, manipulation, travel, some stuff that seems kind of BDSM.
Intrigue.
Yeah. So it's a weird one. And if you remember it from the news, you remember it because the headline was that the vegan chef got caught because she ordered a sausage pizza.
That seems dubious, but
They
hey, whatever.
her and this guy are on the run, and they ordered a pizza to their hotel room, and it was like under one of their names, and
Mm,
so they were able to locate them because of the meat pizza.
that's interesting. But I'm super looking forward to this because I've heard about the doc, but I've never watched it. So I'm going to be curious how this plays out. So it's only 4 episodes. So that one is on Netflix. So if y'all want to join us next month, as we see at the bottom there, Wednesday, June 7th. So yeah, join us then.
Oh, and then, but wait, Doug, because you and I are teaming up again.
Yes, that is true. Do tell.
Our dear wonderful Greg is not going to be around on Friday, so Doug and I are doing not a takeover of Brothers and Booze because we're not doing Cult Bar there, but we're going to be hosting Brothers and Booze, and we're going to be interviewing a dear friend, very talented producer, Jordan Krause, about his new documentary, Peter Case, A Million Miles Away. We'll probably talk about his last documentary, which was Love and Tosha, about Anton Yelchin. And I'm hoping we're going to get some cool Hollywood Insider stuff, but I don't know. We'll find out. He's really fun. He did some co-hosting with me back before he was huge, so it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So hold on. I'm going to share this bit. And this
Oh,
guy,
here it is! Yay!
Jordan. So it'll be me, Renee, and Jordan. This will be interesting because it's a documentarian. I don't think we've ever had one of those folks on the show, so that'll be great. So yeah, I'm going to be looking forward to this just because I will say that Greg always produces our shows. He's the one who does all the background work. So I will warn you folks ahead of time. I have never done the Brothers and Booze live show myself as a producer, so it may have some bumps because Greg is fantastic at it, and we would be lost without that guy. So yeah, but do join us Friday here in 2 days, and we'll talk documentaries and beer and whatever the hell else comes up. So yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for joining us for the Cult Bar. Renee, any last words before we bow out?
Fuck the police and the FBI.
Yeah. ACAB, my friends. ACAB. So yes.
And
All
also
right.
fresh.
Yeah. All right, folks. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Love you guys. Bye.